Welcome to the MI Hunting Podcast. In this episode, we're talking winter scouting and habitat improvements that you can complete right now to get you ready for the upcoming season. All right, welcome to the MI Hunting Podcast. Thank you for listening as always. So, yeah, this episode, basically we're just going to cover, some things that I've been getting done the past few weeks. With the way that the weather has been lately, at this point I would be hoping to be out on the ice, getting a lot of ice fishing in at this point. But we've had warm temps and mixed precipitation and rain that's been kind of making it kind of crappy ice to be out ice fishing. Especially in regards to being able to take the kids out with having a nice, a good base of ice that I know that they'll be safe being out on. They've wanted to get out and do some ice skating while we're out there too. So that's been holding out until we get some better ice and then be able to hit the hard water and, basically start catching some fish. So, in the meantime of not being able to go out ice fishing, I basically took advantage of not having to build up a snow and the warmer temperatures to get out and do some additional scouting as well as get some habitat improvement work done. Basically wanting to get a jump start for the 2023 season. Before we get into that topic, I do want to cover a couple different things. One, I want to get back and go to kind of covering some conservation type or up-to-date news, facts, that type of thing. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into basically what I dubbed the conservation news desk here. So this one here is not a fun topic to cover. It's kind of stretching a little bit on how much of this is considered conservation, but it does affect us as hunters and outdoorsmen and outdoor enthusiasts. So this is a bill that was introduced by Jeffrey Peppers out of Dearborn. It was introduced on December 1st of 2022, so it's actually several weeks old. But again, this is something that's new, catching or getting on my radar here. And I did want to cover it a little bit because it's going to affect us tremendously, especially if you're an individual that has purchased or uses any type of AR platform in regards to shooting sports, hunting. I know especially for the small game and predator hunting, AR platforms are very popular. So that's going to affect us all really. And of course, they're always targeting these quote unquote assault rifles. So I did want to cover what the bill actually says and what they're planning or what they're hoping to accomplish with it. So let's get into this. So this House Bill number 6544. So this is one of two bills that Representative Pepper did introduce into the legislation. So a bill to ban manufacture, possession, purchase, and sale of assault rifles or assault weapons. To provide certain powers and duties for certain state and local officials and agencies to provide for the prolongation of rules and provide penalties. So basically, they're covering what the rules are that they're covering and who's going to have the power to enforce it. So section 1, the use of this act, assault weapon means automatic or semi-automatic rifle with the ability to accept a detachable magazine and has one or more of the following characteristics. So again, this is going to cover not just AR platforms. If you have any type of firearm that has a detachable magazine or a removable clip, that's going to cover, that's going to fall underneath potentially this assault rifle ban as well. But it does have to have some of these characteristics. Now, some of them are pretty straightforward that you would expect for an AR platform. Some other ones, would fall under what many would consider a hunting rifle as well. So one of the other characteristics that the rifle must have for it to fall under the assault weapon classification has to have a pistol grip or a thumb hole stock. Now again, pistol grip pretty standard for most AR platforms. The thumb hole stock, you will see that on some styles of hunting rifles. A folding or telescoping stock. Oh, actually, let me back up a little bit. I did forget the second point here. Any feature capable of functioning as a protruding grip that can be held by the non-trigger hand. So this is any type of forward, grip. I would say a partially poorly written law, either by intent or intentional or unintentionally. So they're talking about any feature capable of functioning as a protruding grip. So even if you put a bipod on the front of your rifle, because you could potentially use it as a handle, that could fall under that category as well. So if you have a bipod on your hunting rifle, that would then classify under the assault weapon categorization potentially. Folding or telescoping stock, a shroud or attach that partially or completely encircles the barrel that permits the shooter to hold a firearm with a non-trigger hand without being burned. So this one again falls under a very broad description. So a shroud that is attached to or partially or completely encircles the barrel. So this is pretty much any type of forehand grip. So even on a wood stock hunting rifle, it has that shroud that goes partially around the barrel that you can hang on to. So again, I don't know if this wording was intentional or not. Basically the fact that they're not really hiding the fact that they're trying to take guns away from people, that they're intentionally leaving this open. All right, so this is section 2. This is going to talk about, basically who falls under this category. So, except as otherwise provided in this section, beginning January 1st of 2024, a person shall not manufacture, possess, purchase, or sell an assault rifle in the state. So basically, any additional manufacturing or purchases of any rifle that falls under that previous category is now outlawed after January 1st, 2024, if this passes again. Now, they do say a person that had purchased a rifle prior to that beginning date could continue to possess the rifle. However, they're going to have to register it. So a person may continue to possess the assault weapon that the person legally possessed before the effective date if both of the following apply. Person registers the assault weapon with the Department of State Police in compliance with the rules adopted for the purposes of the Department of State Police. Person renews the registration of the assault weapon every 5 years. So not only do you have to register that you've had it, you also have to keep up with that registry. Now they go over next to the penalties. A person who violates is guilty of felony punishment by imprisonment for not more than 5 years. And the state police is given authority to enforce. So even if you had a local sheriff's office or your local law enforcement decide that they are not going to enforce this law, the state police could intervene and enforce it. So again, some interesting wording with some of the characteristics that we consider an assault weapon. It falls onto many different types of semi-automatic rifles that their primary uses are for hunting purposes. So again, I don't know if some of this wording was intentional to try to ban more guns and outside of the typical AR platform characteristics or not, but that's the wording that's in it. So we'll have to see what happens with this bill going forward. Now, Pepper also did a second bill. So this is House Bill 6546. This one is basically a ban on being able to open carry for the state of Michigan. So basically they're going over again legal terminology except for otherwise provided in subsection 2. An individual shall not open carry a rifle or shotgun in this state. So interestingly, they didn't mention anything about not being able to open carry a pistol. It's again just targeting rifles or shotguns. Now, they do make some concessions as to individuals that can open carry either a rifle or a shotgun. So, subsection 1 does not apply to the following. An individual engaged in target practice at a recognized target range. So again, if you're doing target practice You have to be at a designated, or what would consider a recognized target range. Now again, what constitutes as a recognized target range, that's up for interpretation, and for, that was something that would need to be more defined for it to be, again, a good law. A peace officer carrying a firearm during duty and performs a peace officer duties, an individual who is on a property owned by that individual. Again, the wording on this is very interesting. So it's an individual on essentially their own property. So if you are on a friend's, property and you're open carrying, this law does not protect you under the current wording. Again, I don't know if it's intentional if they're doing it this way or if it was unintentional. Again, overall, just a badly written law. If it's, if they did this unintentionally, essentially. All right, so an individual in the United States Armed Forces while carrying in the line of duty. So you better be in uniform if you're going to be carrying it. An individual who is hunting, an individual who is carrying a firearm on the premise of either the following: a gun show, federally licensed firearm dealer, or individual. And then they get into section 3. An individual who violates this section is guilty of the following. So apparently you get a kind of like a 1-2 strike here. So first offense, misdemeanor, and a fine. Second offense, turns into a felony and punishable for imprisonment no more than 5 years. And then they go under use of federally licensed firearm dealer means a term defined in section 15, gun show, building, structure, a facility where dealers and firearms are sell trade. And then they go over, the definition from previous, laws on the books of what a rifle is and what a shotgun is. So this bill here is, again, another poorly written bill that is left open with a lot of interpretation. Now, whether that is either something that they intentionally do to be able to broaden its scope or broaden its reach, which, if that's the case, then they're definitely showing their hand as to what they're trying to do. They're not concerned about trying to protect people. They're just trying to take guns away from individuals. So, again, this comes up time and time again as to, is there a gun violence issue in the country? Certainly, there's no secret about the, kind of the general knowledge of the total number of gun-related deaths are in this country. So I'm going to pull up a brief thing here from the CDC. We'll get into some additional information about the CDC here shortly. But also, essentially, even according to the CDC, we average somewhere between 45 and 48, maybe even you could say even up to 50,000 gun-related deaths in the U.S. Now, these are all lumped sum together, so these are, gun-related murders, homicides, suicides, and unintentional gun deaths, or I guess you could say self-inflicted or unintentional, which certainly is quite a lot. Now, again, if you're looking at the number of suicides, that's somewhere around 13 to 14,000 deaths per year, which is not necessarily a gun issue. That's more of a mental health issue. But the one thing that they are definitely trying to hide these days is the defensive use of firearms. Now, for a number of years, the CDC had basically numbers on the number of defensive firearm uses within the country. But it looks like as of 2021, due to pressure from, I guess we'll just pull it up. So we've had this article from Fox News. CDC removes stats on defensive gun use over pressure from gun control activists. And the biggest thing is the reason why they wanted to hide that is the stats from the CDC. They did a study finding that instances of defensive gun use occurred somewhere between 60,000 and 2.5 million times per year. Now, if you look at the number of defensive gun uses in comparison to the actual number of gun deaths, it's not even comparable. So potentially the number of lives that are saved from the use of firearms far outweighs the number of actual gun deaths recorded in the country. But those who are trying to ban guns or take guns away from individuals, they don't want that knowledge out for the public. So that's why I'm assuming why they eliminated, that published, data from even the CDC. So certainly I'm going to keep an eye on what is going on with this bill. For me, I certainly do not want to see this gun ban make any further progress. So hopefully this bill gets killed quite quickly. Certainly I was on more of the side of hoping that the state of Michigan would go to a constitutional carry and actually, loosen up some of their gun laws. Because I'm a firm believer that taking more guns away is not making anyone any safer. All right, so the next item I want to talk about is on a far happier note and far more fun thing to talk about. So our friends with Trekin Outdoors is hosting a banquet on March 11th. So this is one of the first banquets they're planning on doing. When I talked to Chris, he had mentioned that he's planning on doing some big events for the 2023 season. And this is the first of those events that he had mentioned. So the event again is March 11th, starting at 4:30 p.m. at the Hidden Creek Farms in Charlotte, Michigan. So if you're interested in going, they have tickets available on their website, which will be linked down in the description. And that's at trekinoutdoors.com. And click on their 2023 hunting banquet tab. There's going to be lots of different prizes given away. So MI Hunting is actually going to be there, and we are actually donating some items for the giveaways. So I'm excited about that. I hope to partner up with some other companies as well to provide some additional items. So I'm certainly happy to be part of this and to be able to provide, some of those prizes for individuals. So I do hope to see you there. So mark it on your calendar. Again, it's going to be a great time. Any type of outdoor event is always fantastic to be part of that community. All right, so let's get into the topic at hand. So like I said before, the weather's been kind of crazy. I haven't been able to get out and go ice fishing like I had planned on it. So, basically trying to make the best of, the weather we had. Got out there, did some additional scouting, as well as, busted out the chainsaw to do some habitat work. As I did last year, during the winter months, I really like to take advantage of that part of getting out there, cutting some timber, basically adding some habitat, building, getting some structure on the ground, and basically building cover and hopefully providing food in regards to regeneration for the deer during the, late fall and winter months with more woody browse available. So two big things I really accomplished. One was getting some additional scouting done. Now on the property, I have my main food plot towards the back end of the property, and I noticed that most of the deer came from essentially the west side of the property where there was additional cover. Now, I always kind of knew generally roughly the trails or the areas that the deer were coming from, but I hadn't actually taken the time to completely map out exactly what trails were being used, the direction of travel. Kind of had an idea of that as well. I went in there when there was very little snow and was able to basically map out and trace the vast majority of the trails. Now, again, had a pretty good idea that most of the trails were traveling from east to west, but also once I got into the more thicker cover, was able to determine that, again, to map out a lot of the general movement. So I mapped out each of the lines, basically tracing each trail the best I could follow. Now the layout of the property is I have my main food source on the east side of the property. I've screened it in with some switchgrass on the west side of the food plot. There's also some immature apple trees that we've planted over the past couple of years that hopefully within the next few years will start developing apples and providing additional soft mass food source along the edge of the food plot. Behind the switchgrass is some inner mix of different grasses and immature pine trees, some additional covers in there. You can definitely see that the main areas where the deer are traveling through, there's some additional browse line where some of those branches on those pines are higher up, where you can actually walk through in between those trees where the deer have browsed down those lower branches. Then it opens up to a small area where there's some immature aspens, so some regen of some sapling trees. There's red orchard dogwood mixed with some other shrubs and bushes in there as well. So it's kind of a mix of almost looks like an old clear cut type deal where you got some early successional growth, some regen growing in there. And then you get to the west side of the property, and it's a mix of popples and primarily cedars and white pine. So following the vast majority of those trails and knowing the general movement, I want to cut in some of those pockets, especially of the aspens. Basically they're mature, big canopy. These trees, again, don't have much timber value, and they are great for regeneration if you cut them completely down to cut them completely off. So basically it's one of my favorite ones to target when trying to build a bedding area or promote regeneration. Those popples, because of the big canopies down to these mature trees, by cutting them down, you're getting a lot of sunlight down to the ground. By dropping the full tree, you're building basically ground cover. You get a lot of those tops the deer will eat on during the course of the winter. Again, additional food on the ground for them. And then comes the spring, that additional sunlight is going to allow some of the other forbs and smaller trees in that area to grow up, thicken up. It did provide additional cover as well as additional food during the spring and summer months. And then that woody browse, as it continues to grow up, it'll be very beneficial this fall and the winter time. And then of course with the popples, having cut them completely off, they're going to regen from the root systems. So there's going to be a lot of saplings that are coming up that will come up over the next few years, providing some really thick, dense cover to hopefully promote some additional bedding in those bedding areas. One thing I've talked about on the farm is that we don't have a ton of cover. We don't have a lot of acreage of timber really on the property itself. So a lot of the deer are actually bedding on adjacent properties and having to travel onto the farm. So a lot of times we're getting deer that make it on their property right at dark or shortly after, or even in the middle of the night. The idea of trying to create these additional pockets to try to draw in more deer closer to the food source and keep them on the property longer. Now again, cutting in these bedding areas or bedding thickets, you could call them, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get a big buck to get bed on them or bed within them, but it's just drawing that additional bedding in. So I'm a firm believer that a lot of deer will do basically layering of the bedding. So does will always bed closest to the food, and the bucks will generally have to bed further out. So by adding additional bedding, so even if the does aren't moving in close to the food source, if they bed within those pockets that I've created, then that allows the bucks to move in just a little bit closer if the does were having the bed further away before adding these bedding pockets. And really, you don't have to do a ton. The two areas that I focused on, the one's a little over a half acre, the one's only about a quarter acre. Just some little pockets that provide some additional, basically a little hub, some additional edge, even within the cover for deer to feel free to, bed in the area, feel secure, and to move around the edges of them. So some of the areas that I focused on, basically looking at the primary trails that cut through the woods there, I tried fell most of the trees, parallel with the trails, or try not to, drop any trees over top of the trails, making it harder for the deer to move around in there. It's one thing where, some of the areas I was able to pile some of the trees on top of each other, make a bit of a brush pile, but allow most of the area to be able where I could even walk freely through the area. Didn't want to make it such a nasty mess that, deer have a hard time, traveling through it. They may still be able to bed around the edges of it, but if they can't move through it, there's a good likelihood that deer aren't going to utilize it in the manner that you'd like them to. So again, primary thing I focused on was with these aspen, again, cutting them all the way down to the ground. They're not going to be really good for hinge cutting. Generally, in my experience, I've never really had any that were able to survive. Even, the few smaller trees I've tried to cut in the past, they just don't survive. So you're looking at other types of trees that may be, more beneficial for doing a hinge cut. I have done some of the smaller maples. Some cherry works pretty good. You do have to be careful because of, I guess it's the grain of the wood. It does split a little bit more than some of the other types of wood. So do be careful when you're starting to lean over. It may completely split and not be able to keep that connection between the base and the top. And then also there's some areas where there's some elm as well as some young ash trees as well. So those work pretty good. At least in my experience, they work pretty good for hinge cut as well. Another good thing about some of those other ones, even if you don't get a hinge cut, if you cut those trees off completely, they're going to be very quickly regenerating out of the stump as well. Even after the first year of another area that I cut also on the farm, basically started already having regen that spring of, basically shoots coming out of, the stump that was still in the ground, providing additional food. And especially over the next few years, it'll thicken up, it'll bush out more, and provide additional cover. And then also been doing more of a breakdown of kind of how the deer utilize the property over the last season. Now, one of the big things that I noticed right away from the 2022 season is that without having a good, primary food source, either on the property or around the property, like a big ag field or something like that, the deer just absolutely hammered the food plot. I actually downsized a little bit this past year, basically having one primary food plot, again, towards the back of the property. And unfortunately, the deer have eaten it down almost to the dirt, even before end of October even. So with that, the goal is to expand the food plots quite a bit. So again, this is the front field, or the top field we call it. So the idea is to basically do a food plot about the same size as the one down in the bottom field or towards the back of the property, as well as provides a perennial food plot as well up in that top field, and then also try to incorporate some grain as well. So I have it kind of blocked out to about 3 acres for my primarily green food source. I have about 2 acres that I plan to do primarily in clover, so a really easy perennial, and then also add in, again, depending on what the pricing looks like, try to add in a few acres of soybean mixed in with probably some other type of plants that can provide some additional benefit to the soil. Also going to incorporate up on this top field, there's a big patch of mature maples in it that I hunted the edge of last year. Now with this additional food source, I am going to have to provide or put in a screening between the food plot and those mature hardwoods. Basically the goal is I don't want deer that are in the timber to be able to look out across the field, as well as I don't want deer to be in the field and be able to look into the hardwood. So, again, if I'm coming into the spot during the morning, I want to be able to sneak in through the hardwoods and not disturb the deer that are in the food plot. During the rut time frame, or even the pre-rut, I don't want a deer to be able to stand in the mature timber, look out across the field, and see that there's no does out in the field, and just continue on looking elsewhere. Again, if he's in a situation where the wind's not blowing directly at him from the food source, he's going to have to actually, go over there and visually inspect the field. Just another, aspect, breaking up adding some additional cover, additional edge. Always seems that whenever I'm scouting or there's an area where you have a lot of different diversity of either different plant species or terrain differences or different types of cover, if you're going from a hardwood to a pine or a cedar swamp to open field, again, just the more of those different components you have all kind of meshed together, it always seems to be a hotspot or a hub for deer movement. They just love having that diversity of all those different components. So if you're able to combine them in a small area and kind of work them together to where they, you can kind of manipulate or promote additional movement to where you can capitalize hunting wise. Kind of hope that all makes sense going through that. But yeah, I mean, that's it for in regards to the majority of the work I've been doing now. I've gone out and scouted with a cousin of mine. Basically kind of the same thing. We wanted to take advantage of the weather and be able to do some additional scouting on his private piece that he hunts as well. We actually, basically we pulled into the spot where we were going to, get out of the vehicle, bump some deer out that were out feeding in a bit of a feeding in a bit of a green food stores, kind of on this little plateau in the parking area. We get out, and just as we walk into the timber, we find a fresh shed. So he was pretty excited about that. It's the very first shed that he's found on his property. We scouted out. Basically, again, same thing. We're looking at, we're scouting a small pond that is partially on his property, where there's a big difference of, terrain. Basically, kind of two high points that run down to this pond, creating a bit of a saddle. And then there's a mix of different types of timber around the area. With that diversity of the terrain and different types of cover, we found several different trails, rubs, scrapes, and even a few bedding areas near that pond area. So we've already kind of come up with a game plan, a potential spot for a tree stand for hopefully either early bow season or even during the pre-rut. It becomes kind of a travel corridor around that pond area. So definitely a good start to the 2023 season, getting out there, getting boots on the ground, doing some additional scouting. And again, one thing I love using a mapping system like the Hunt Stand that I use, and be able to map everything out. And then you can even look back at it after and kind of zoom out, take a look at the big picture, kind of just get a lay of the land, just looking at the map. Even after times of dealing with, looking at the maps of the farm, just adding that additional, intel, you're able to kind of sit back and stew on the information, and, things become apparent to you that you might have missed in years past. So certainly take advantage of some type of mapping system. Again, my favorite is Hunt Stand, but certainly use whatever one that you're most comfortable with. And then with that, now we finally are starting to get some cold weather. It's more consistent temperatures that would be more conducive to getting some more, ice on the lakes. So over the next couple weeks, going to be hitting the ice. They're hitting the lakes a little bit more, getting the kids out ice fishing, and hopefully having some fish fries here in the next few weeks. So I hope to be able to have a few episodes talking about that and some of the strategies, and basically just kind of talking ice fishing during the winter months here. So that's it for now. Again, this is a great time to take advantage of doing some additional scouting. So if you are like me and a whitetail freak, then get out there, do some additional scouting, look at some additional mapping. If you're looking for additional places to hunt, now's a good time to start looking over maps, finding some areas of potential that you want to check out later in the year. If you do habitat work, this is a great time to get a jump start on it as well. Start thinking about what your food plot program is going to do if you do food plots at all. And again, get out there and enjoy some of this winter activities. Again, we're actually going to be getting some winter-like conditions here shortly. You'll be able to take advantage of that. And I mean, in the next few months, it's going to be into the springtime, and turkey hunting and spring fishing is going to open up. So things are going to start ramping up pretty quickly here. But that's really it for this episode. So hopefully I was able to give you some ideas about things moving forward that you can take advantage of. Hopefully get out there and enjoy some winter activities. And with that, as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.